Welcome to the Read Your Keys podcast. I am your host, Joe Lopez. If you're enjoying the content, please go ahead, like, squish, smash, pulverize those like and follow buttons. We're on, YouTube, Spotify, and iTunes. Today I have a special guest, Mr. Silas Caste. I was talking to Jeff Putnam, a friend of mine on Twitter, and he was like, "Hey, this is a good dude you should talk to." I checked out his profile. I was like, "Man, this is a fascinating story that he has, and some fascinating work that he's doing." Silas, welcome to the show today, brother.
Thanks, Joel. Really appreciate you having me on. I mean, it's an honor. Anybody that's willing to talk to me is for me is an honor. So I really appreciate you having me on.
You're welcome. Yeah, the story is pretty crazy. So Silas, he you can find him at Bullethead Books on Twitter and also on Instagram, bulletheadbooks.com on his website, and is the author of Intro to Dreams, which, from what I understand, Silas, is based on a true story and true events, right?
Yeah, it's inspired by the true events of my life. I was writing a little bit about it this morning actually, and I was kind of I was laughing a little bit. I mean, it's inspired by true events. It's definitely a fictional novel, and I take some license with it, but you know the reality is it's based on a true event, and the event itself sort of speaks for itself. I didn't have to fictionalize too much about that. That was um, enough of a story as it was. So, but some of the other parts I had to play up a little bit. But the main aspect of my story is I mean it wrote itself for the most part.
Can you tell some of us or the audience about
Yeah,
your story? Like I know you've talked about it before and you kind of followed on Twitter a little bit, but I think as you kind of give more of it, I think it's just like, wow,
right.
this is nuts.
Yeah, and what I happened to be writing about this morning was the idea of when we talk about domestic violence, and we talk about we talk a lot about the physical violence side of domestic violence. And the reason why I went ahead and wrote this story is because the physical violence part of my story gives a lot more credence to the things that happened before it. I mean, it's only a piece of it, but it's the one piece that gives my story a little bit of uniqueness. So, and basically what I was saying is the ending of my story. When people hear the ending of my story, they listen more closely to a lot of the things that happened earlier, where
Mhm.
they may not listen to it quite as closely. I don't think a lot of people would even know my story were it not for the ending of the story. But where it ends is effectively I was in a tough divorce situation, which I think a lot of men and women find themselves in. And at the right before this, I was about to be awarded full custody of my kids, whether it was temporary or not. We weren't sure, but um, the the outcome of that was my ex-wife waking me up at 4 o'clock in the morning with a wooden baton. I call it a police baton to my head. Jumped up. There was a struggle. Um, as we were struggling, a gun goes off, and there's just giant flash in the room, and just my ears ringing. And so I realized she has a gun, so I calm down, and she calms down, and I actually sat down on my bed and flipped my light on, and there she is standing at the end of my bed. She's kind of just sitting there. It's kind of like she didn't know what to do. And she goes, "You're gonna hand over rights. You're gonna give up the battle, and you're gonna hand over rights to the kids." And I'm like, "Yeah, you win, right? I mean, you're the one with the gun." And I mean, you really don't know what to do. But to make a long story short, um, she made all these demands, to which I was like, "Yeah, sure, go ahead." But then when it came down to it, she said, "No, roll over on your bed and face down." And she hog-tied me, at gunpoint. She hog-tied me with flex ties. First my hands behind my back, and then my legs. And um, she proceeds to do that. I tried to get out at one point, but the gun was right in her hand, and I couldn't really get her off me, and escape. But she wrapped me up in my bed sheets, and then she sat me up on my bed, and I hear this kind of this crinkle. She wrapped saran wrap or cling wrap around the bed sheets around my head. And um, if you this was about 10 years ago, and if you remember, this was around the time that Dexter was pretty big in
Mhm.
terms of a show. And so, I always wonder if, she had been watching that show, kind of getting these ideas. But you wrap the saran wrap around my head. At that point, I'm just squirming, trying to get out of the flex ties. I fell face flat down on the ground. And I'm struggling. I'm yelling, the kids. I'm trying to, do whatever. And, I look back at that. I'm not sure if I was yelling to her or I'm trying to yell outside the house in case somebody's, walking by or, taking an early morning jog or something like that. But I'm screaming out of the top of my lungs. And while I'm squirming, she's beating the back of my head with that baton. And it's, my head's getting beaten and hitting my forehead on my hardwood floors. And but I'm struggling still while she's beating the back of my head. And eventually, one of the flex ties on my wrists started to loosen up, and I was able to sneak out one of my wrists, put a hole in the saran wrap because I was about to run out of any kind of air. And miraculously, I was able to, within um, one swipe, I took my legs and just kicked out of the flex ties, and then I jumped up. I'm in this jumble of bed sheets and saran wrap, and she's surprised. We look each other in the eyes. She grabs the gun, and so I'm trying to get the gun away from her. There's a scuffle. The gun goes off, and I felt was a just a slice above my ear, and it just went right above my ear is what I felt. And but throughout that, I got hold of the gun and was able to rip it out of her hands. And then from there was just sort of a confused, what do we do now? Because the tide returned. I was trying to figure out the gun. I couldn't get the hammer to stick, and so I thought it was broken. And she went outside of the room. She went to my garage. She was clearly looking for another weapon because she came back and she stuck the broom before I was able to get the door shut. I had the gun in my hand, but it was useless because I couldn't figure it out in the melee. And so she's got a broom shoved in the door. I'm trying to shut the door. I took the gun and I turned it around, facing away from me, and I swung over and I hit her right on top of the head. And that happened. Two or three of those, I was able to get her right on top of the head. And the last time I looked her in the eyes, um, the door was about that wide. She's right there, and I'm looking at her, and this drip of blood just comes dripping right down her nose. But eventually, I was able to kick the broom. I pulled the broom into the room and shut the door, locked the door, and I went looking for my phone. Room is a complete disaster. Mattresses off, bed sheets everywhere, saran wrap, everything. And I couldn't find my phone, so I went to the window. I tried to open it. One of my windows was always jammed. Actually, both windows in that bedroom was always jammed. So I tried to open it. It would not open. And I look back at all these moments, and I'm like, in the panic, if I had slowed down, maybe I would have been able to figure this out. But it's just chaos in this moment. So I'm screaming out the window. There's another window. I decided to go over to that window. But when I did, I saw the phone lying underneath my bed, and I was able to pick it up. When I picked up the phone, the door starts jiggling, and I look back. I'm able to get 911 when I start dialing, and the phone starts, and the person picks up. The jiggling at the door stops. I don't know what happens from there, but I went into my bathroom and I just sat on that 911 call, and it that 911 call lasted 13 minutes. It took them 13 minutes to get to my house. And that's something I think about a lot because, when you're in a violent situation like that, for them to take 13 minutes, there's a lot that can happen in 13 minutes. This whole attack, from waking me up with a baton to my head to me making that phone call, was about 40 minutes.
Mm.
So, that includes, her waking me up, the scuffle, all that, her, tying me up in bed sheets, but there was a lot going on there. There was conversation happening. I'm telling her, you're going to kill me. And she's like, I don't want to kill you. I love you. And she's like really acting weird. And I'm like, your fingerprints are all over me. And she tells me my fingerprints won't be all over you. I'm going to clean you up nice and good. And it's really creepy the way she said it. I just have that weird voice in my head when she says it. But I mean, all that happened, and everything happened. 30 minutes. I know the exact time. I don't know it off the top of my head right now, but yeah, like 30 to 40 minutes. So 13 minutes is a long time for the cops to show up. But what it was because there was a gun involved. They had to wait for a sergeant to get out of bed and get there, right? And so it
Mm.
took them 13 minutes. By the time they got there, I was still on the line with the 911 guy, and lights come flashing in my window, and I didn't trust it. I was like, I don't, is that you or not? I mean, I have no idea what's out there. She had told me a man was with her, so I actually had um, a fear that she was not alone. And so when they started flashing their lights in my window, I was like, "Is that you?" I don't know. I had to ask quite a few times to get confirmation that it was them. I finally got the courage to go out, and I opened up my door just a little bit, and there's a cop standing in my entryway with a flashlight over his head and his gun drawn. And so I walk out, um, I'm with hands up saying, "Hey, the gun's in the bathroom," and that's what happened. They found her the next day. She was in the hospital. She had driven all the way home to East Texas from Austin, Texas, which if driven correctly was 4 or 5 hour drive, but she was able to make it usually in about 3 to 4 hours. But they found her. She had gone home and told her mom that she thinks I had been shot, and then she's bleeding and just a mess herself because of the head wound. And they took her to the hospital, and the cops found her in the hospital. Um, and this happened. So the sequence of events was I had gotten temporary custody of the boys about 3 weeks earlier. We had a hearing coming up in another week, and she got one weekend with our kids, and it happened to be the night before she was supposed to give me back the kids for custody, that she did this. So the kids were at her house staying with her mom when she came and did this, and so the cops picked them up at the hospital as well. So yeah, I mean that's the kind of the ending crazy story that I think you read about on
Hmm.
Twitter, which I mean I have a pinned tweet out there that kind of gives that story a little bit, but I think sometimes I give new details, sometimes I leave them out, so I never know what story people are getting because it depends on what the context is, but yeah, that's kind of where my story ends, from a domestic violence perspective, I guess, in
Well,
that
it's intense.
relationship.
Question. So when you first heard that first gunshot, that the gun just went off. That didn't hit you, right?
No, no, the first gunshot, yeah, the first gunshot did not hit me. It was shot into the floor. They found a bullet hole in the floor. And
Hmm.
to this day, I have no idea if she intended to fire that or if she was grabbing the gun and it went off unintentionally. I couldn't tell you what was the reality there, but I know um, for months, if not years, after that gunshot was when I smelled gunpowder in my nose for years after that. If I When I took the exit from the highway to get off towards that house, that smell of gunpowder, the olfactory memory just
Hmm.
comes right back, and I just get this huge smell of gunpowder. It's very interesting. I mean, I've always tried to understand, how much PTSD is there, and that's the piece where it says to me, it's there, but it doesn't show up in the ways you expect. I mean, it shows up in the smell of gunpowder in your nose when you're getting off an exit, more
Hmm.
so than it does in other ways. But But yeah, so that anyways, that gunshot, it went into the floor, and like I said, I
Okay.
can't tell you if she meant to shoot that or not.
Well, so once the police come, do they take you to the hospital? Are you in there for a couple of days
Yeah.
or?
Well, yeah. Well, right. So I go out of the house and there's a couple cops out there and they take my story. I'm answering questions and there's an ambulance just lit up outside my driveway. And so I hop in the driveway. One story I like to tell people is on the way over there. I don't know what this guy's deal with, but the EMT tells me, he goes, I don't mean to scare you, but I think I see brains. And I'm like, I don't know why you have to tell me that. I saw him 2 years later at the trial, and he I didn't remember him, and he told me who he was, and that's all that could go through my head is, dude, you literally told me you thought he saw brains, but thought I saw him brains. But so I took a ride to the hospital. I was in the hospital for about 4 days, well, 3 nights, I believe in total. Um, and it was I probably could have gotten out of there a little bit earlier, but at the time, the shock of it all was just the hospital felt so safe. So yeah,
Mhm.
I was there for about 3 days, and then I was able to come home and see the house for the first time, which was kind of a surreal experience when I walked back in.
So
So
you
yeah.
were still cognizant enough to give, the report to the police after the fact, so they didn't rush you to the hospital right away?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's funny. So I went into the hospital. I had the the gunshot did not go over my ear. It actually entered my cheek. And it
Mm,
wasn't until the second to last day that I was in the hospital that I realized, because I really didn't know that they gave me some stitches and they told me we only stitched up one side because we want to make sure any kind of pus or any kind of stuff can come out. And I didn't really understand that because to me it had just gone past me. But it took me a few days to learn that the the bullet went in my cheek, traveled through my cheek, through my neck, and it um, exited right about here on
mhm,
the back of my neck. And that whole area was bandaged, but at the same time, they needed to put 13 staples plus who knows how many stitches on the back of my head. So as far as I was concerned, all that stuff back there was just from the beating that I took to the back of my head.
mhm,
And so I didn't. It took me 2 days to register that the bullet had gone through my cheek and out my neck and missed my spine by about an inch. I mean, I can't.
wow.
It's amazing how lucky, how fortunate the whole incident was. I mean, if if you ever see a show where you see someone's missing and then you learn that they were in fact killed. I mean, this is sort of the inside look of exactly that. It's just I got so lucky that I was able to somehow get out of those zip ties, those flex
Mhm.
ties. I mean, that was the first lucky thing. But then the second bullet that was shot, for it to go through my cheek and out and miss my spine by an inch. I mean, that's it's extremely lucky that I walked away from there. But yeah, in the morning, I mean, I was very cognizant. All those staples that they put in my head and stitches and everything, they didn't see any signs of concussion, which is
Really?
odd. And
Yeah.
yeah, and I one of the funny things that I try to explain, which I mean, I don't know, you never know what's going to go through your head, but I actually called work after this, all the people left the room, and I had a moment. I called my boss at work and told him I wasn't going to be in for a few days, and he's like, he gave me crap for a minute, but then I told him what happened. He's like, "Dude, what are you doing calling me?" I was like, "Well, because I knew you were going to give me shit for not showing up, so I'm going to call you." But it's funny. I mean, um, yeah, I mean, I was pretty cognizant. I was pretty aware of everything, and then after making that phone call, I shot a note to a bunch of people, as many local friends. I couldn't call or write my family right away. That took a while for me to kind of get up the nerve to tell my my mom and sister at the time,
Mm-hmm.
because they knew everything that I was going through. But and they, these things, it was something that they were fearing, and so I knew it was going to be a tougher conversation. But I shot a note to local friends, just letting them know what had happened and stuff. But yeah, I was pretty cognizant. There's not much of it that I don't remember. I get details of the story in the attack, backwards, and I mix up some of the details. When I picture us fighting, I pictured us turned around relative to where we actually were when she shot me through the cheek, because I thought it would have gone in the wall that connected to my master bathroom, but it was connected to the opposite wall, which really surprised me. So I get details mixed up, but the memory is really really clear, um, of all the events that happened. I don't get details wrong, but I get details a little bit
Mm-hmm.
misplaced or slightly different. Yeah.
Let me let me ask Silas. So this thing happens, and you've been through a lot. Did you kind of go back and try to retrace the steps and be like, hey, what did I miss when we were dating or when we were married? Like, did I were
Yeah.
there red flags and I just kind of pushed past them because you loved her, or there's a lot of factors that go in a relationship. But
Yeah.
did you
I
did you
mean,
see signs beforehand that this could have been a possibility?
yeah, and I think anybody that's been in, and it doesn't even have to be this of intense of a situation. I think
Hmm.
anytime you get into a relationship and you kind of look back and you go, you have 2020 hindsight, and you said, yeah, I'll kind of let that
Right.
slip. Yeah, I mean, that there's all kinds of pieces of my story that I pieced together. For one, I allowed some things to happen before we got married that I would not have allowed in prior relationships, and so I've had to really face that and look at what was going on with me that allowed me to get into that relationship. And so look, those years in my life were a tough time. I mean, it was I was trying to take off in my career. I had had some failures personally. I'd had some failures in relationships, and my mindset before I met my ex-wife, my mindset was looking at all the relationships I'd had, you know, earlier that that I could have been perfectly happy with, and I had personally made choices to walk away from, right? And so I was in a spot where I was trying to take as much responsibility myself for my commitment um, to my relationships. And I met her at sort of that perfect storm of time of me considering what I wanted out of a relationship going forward, as well as me being in a vulnerable spot from a self confidence um, perspective. Because I had kind of gone through some of those failures, and I was struggling with that, and at the same time trying to understand what I wanted out of a relationship. So when I met her, um, after we became serious, it took us a while to be serious. 5 6 months we were serious, but my frame of mind at that time in my life, and that's changed now because I'm a little bit older and I've a little bit better ability in relationships, especially with this experience. But at the time, um, I had a set rule that I would never propose to someone within a year of knowing them, and we were not just proposed to, but we were married inside a year of our first date. And so I think a lot about that, and the things that led to me allowing that boundary to get pushed. Um, she had gotten pregnant, and that created a lot of conflict in my mind between doing the right thing and and what I wanted with a relationship. And again, in prior relationships, if I had gotten the pressure that I got from her, I would have I would have said no. This is not where we're going. But between the pregnancy and where I was, I eventually justified it in my own mind that this was the right thing to do because I did love her. There was no doubt I did love her, and I gave her a lot of excuses when it came to why she may be acting erratic. She's pregnant, right? She was a little bit younger. Maybe she's a little bit more less mature, and still learning her way to navigate around relationships. I mean, I gave her too many excuses. And then when we were married, that was a whole other battle itself. It took me. I mean, things were good for periods, but then there were wild swings, and there were things I was finding out throughout the marriage that were a struggle to figure out. And at the one of the very last, there were two last straws. The first last straw was I learned that. So she had brought a my stepdaughter. She When I met her, she had a kid who was a daughter who was 6 years old, turning seven, in the first 6 months that I knew her. And on our very first date, she told, I asked, where's the father? Because I didn't know. I had never been in a relationship like that. So I was curious. And um, yeah, I was curious about, what I would have to deal with relative to the father. And she said, I was raped. She told me she was raped.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, I spent years having to console her on the date of a rape. And I found out about 3 months before I filed for divorce, I found out that, she hadn't been raped, that she had actually been married
Oh,
to
no
a guy. She
way.
just got pregnant. She just got pregnant at, 17 or 18 years old, and um, had, I guess, pressured him to get married. Um, though she told me it was her parents that pressured her to get married. Even after I learned that she'd been raped, she tried to blame her parents. And eventually, now I know a lot more about the story. But at the time, it was trying to figure it out. Um, but I learned that about 3 months prior to filing divorce. That the end cause was I was trying to get her help, and I was willing to do whatever I needed if I needed help, because she told me I was all kinds of things. But I said I'll go get a therapist, and I did. And but trying to get her to go do the same, she wouldn't do that. And that was the end. The final straw was, I mean, I've got someone here we've got all these problems, but she's not willing to really face her own demons. Um, where I mean, it takes two, and that was the final straw, right? There were a lot of straws in there, but if you're getting into marriage and you're you're committed to that marriage, you do put a lot of effort in, and there's no doubt there were signs of a lot of things that I can look back on um, that are red flags. Um, it's hard to give advice to others who've gone through it because, for one, my situation is a little bit different. If I had faced this situation a couple years earlier, it probably doesn't get this far. Um, and I also don't. I'm not. I don't have a cycle of abusive relationships where some people. I think that's a different situation. But
Mm-hmm.
still, the gut instincts, right? I mean, you have those gut instincts, and you got to listen to them. I wanted to go ahead and have the baby with her, but I wanted her and I to be on solid ground, on the same page before we got married. And I let that boundary slip. And there's no, as much as I can look at the pressure she put on, I can't, you, I can't look at that without at least admitting to myself at the bottom, at the end of the day, I'm the one that allowed that boundary slip, and I didn't set my foot down and say, "Look, we can continue, but this is a boundary for me, and if you can't respect that, then I think we need to part. We need to figure a different way out because
Let me ask
That
Silas.
that's yeah.
You had mentioned that the pressure that came with her being pregnant, and obviously you were the father, and how that influenced you. If you don't mind me asking, were there other relationships where that kind of scenario had popped up, where it's like, hey, the woman was pregnant, and you decided not to get married?
Yeah, well, yeah, no, there was, and she decided not to go through the pregnancy, and that really threw a loop, and that's part of that's one of the earlier parts of I talk about that difficult time. That was something I was struggling with,
Mm.
with
I
that
guess
situation. Was
that makes sense, right? You have that issue that happened, and now wanting
right.
to make things right, right? And
Yeah,
let me
you
ask.
know, I'm not.
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, that's a hard one for me to process because I'm not because there were different situations, right, where we decided pretty early that was not right for us because the two of us knew that the relationship was not really in a good spot to bring that into the world. And again, I have different thoughts I do today than I would then, but given that time period where I was and where the two of us were, um, but at the same time, yeah, that's definitely in the back of your mind, right? When you've already kind of gone through that, there was no discussion of not going through the pregnancy, and that was not something I ever pushed. And they're different situations, um, but you can't discount the relativity of having that event in your life prior to that. And again, that was happening as my career difficulties were taking off. I'd actually gone back to school, and it was in um, a period of when the economy was not so great, and so I was struggling to find a job, and I found a job, and then I struggled with that, and that wasn't working out, and so there's a lot of moving parts there. But yeah,
Hmm.
to your point, I mean that there's definitely a large piece that I can't discount that was in the back of my mind.
Yeah. And then I think I mean I don't know, but it sounds like this one was very intense, so the highs could be very high. Is that something that was
Right.
appealing to? I mean, if I'm correct, we're probably talking about like what, '06 to 2010, where the
Yeah.
economy, it's
Yeah.
hard to find jobs. So as a man, like, hey, I
Right.
want to provide, and then here's a woman who is
Right.
intense, and like it's this great
Right.
feeling that kind of
Yeah.
comes with being around. So if it had been 4 years earlier, job's good, and you know it's not like your confidence is high, your boundaries are a lot stronger. Like I get that, right? Like
Yeah.
when I'm
Right.
confident, my boundaries are strong. When I'm not feeling it, it's
Right.
like I'm
Right.
gonna let things slide. And if it's an extended period, and especially in dealing with romance or relationships, you want the other person to be good, and there's someone
Yeah.
that goes along with it, but it makes sense that that you would blow by
Yeah.
the red flags.
It's well, yeah. There's another and like you're hitting on. I mean, this is good stuff to talk about when you're trying to understand. And this is obviously all kind of thoughts that I that went through my head. And I'll throw another wrinkle in there. There was a relationship in between there that really beat me down from an emotional standpoint. Right. So I was have that, and then you know I mean, within a year, it was a short relationship, but for whatever reason, that relationship really crushed me emotionally. To be honest, that the highs and lows, it was almost difficult. Within 6 months, it was almost difficult to get to that point to where you're really understanding that the highs are good or not. I will say this: there was safety in this relationship because there was a because I loved her, but that emotional vulnerability was not quite as strong. So, and it's really difficult to kind of articulate that how this happens, but um, there was less of a fear that if it didn't work out, I would be emotionally destroyed the way I had been a couple years prior. The reality is, I probably wasn't ready for a relationship, right? But it had been 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd sort of allowed myself back in, and so I I have I look at the highs and lows. I think I'm not sure that was as strong of a pull. Um, well, I'm probably going to contradict myself here, and I'm not sure I've talked with too many people about kind of this side of it, but um, there there was definitely connections in our ugly times. Um, when things would kind of patch up, there was a little bit of a high there when it patched
Mm-hmm.
up.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I can at least admit to that, where there was a little bit of more of a fun time right after we patched up. But I mean, I look at the relationship, and the one thing that I almost regret a little bit is feeling comfortable and thinking that that was what made it okay,
Mm-hmm.
right? If that makes it sense,
Yeah.
if that made it okay to make the commitment to marry, um, when because I was less fearful of being hurt.
Well, I
So
think what's interesting, Silas, is that you had said that, if it like she couldn't hurt you emotionally. So I think that might have made you feel strong, right? Like
right,
I've been beat up in these other relationships where I cared. I made myself vulnerable, and then work's not going well. Here's somewhere where like I feel like I have some control. Like if you leave, then you can't hurt me. And that was actually the thing that made you vulnerable. I think if you think about it, it's like you can't hurt me turned into, well, you couldn't hurt me emotionally, so it manifested itself physically.
yeah. Well, no, I absolutely do. I mean, you can't. You, I mean, you have to think. She may have sensed that a little bit,
Mm,
right? So
yeah,
there
yeah.
wasn't. And so that gave her a little bit of less control, which opened up her vulnerability, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so yeah, I mean that's something I do think about that. I mean that you can't not look at it, that she had to have sensed that, a little bit, and maybe wanting control herself in the relationship.
Right. I
So
think
yeah,
I think that's a normal when people come into a relationship, right? The needs aren't being met. There's this just,
right,
yeah, you try to do it healthy, but if there was all this other underlying issues on top of it, then
right,
you're dealing with two broken people now, and they're you're acting out in
yeah,
various
yeah,
ways.
yep,
Man, that's a lot. That's a lot, man. Um,
yeah,
and then in there too, we have children now too, right?
right, right, yeah,
Um, and it's really strange to think that, like, if she was acting out because she wanted you or because she actually wanted the kids, like that's a really strange thing to kind of like wrap your head around. Like she did this because she wanted the kids, but by doing this, like, she's sealed the deal that she's not going to get the kids. But
right,
also in the proceedings, that usually they go with, I've never been through that, but my understanding is usually they favor the mother in this instance,
right,
but they went with you. So there must have been a lot of stuff already beforehand,
right,
for them to be like,
yeah,
yeah, we're gonna go with the father because we're sensing, or we see that there's a pattern or behaviors before that's not, it's better for them to be with their father.
yeah. And I mean, it took years. I'll be honest. When we had one final push trying to make things up, and right before I filed divorce, and she got pregnant, so it took us a longer time to that was when she got pregnant with my second child. And it took us, we weren't in Texas, you're not allowed to finalize a divorce until after a child's born, so we couldn't do anything, we couldn't finalize that divorce. But throughout that, the minute I filed for divorce, she started making claims of abuse and things like that. And one of the things she did, I guess this would be the first of three final straws was at one point when when family members were in town for a wedding. She had put a bunch of bruises on her arms, and I have no idea to this day. I have no idea where they came from. Um, and I think she did it because my family was coming in town. But having family in town saved me because they were able to see the number of stories that she came up with to say how these bruises got on her. But she used pictures from that wedding, and she tried to claim that I had put these bruises on her. That was the first attempt, but through 2 years of dealing with divorce and even post divorce, she attempted to put 6 different protective orders against me. The first one went to a full 2-day trial, and we had it took quite a bit before the judge finally ruled that there would be no protective order. And from there, we were able to fight the protective orders a little bit better because it'd be over everything. A scratch on my child, came home, and another time I got pulled into an emergency order because my son had fallen. We had gone to a bouncy house, and he went from a carpet um, to a to a tiled floor, and he slipped on the tiles and fell and hit his cheek. And luckily, the owner of the bounce house area of the bounce house business came in and was ready to testify, but it got stopped before that. But so the bottom line is 6 different protective orders. She staged her house as a burglary and tried to frame me for burglary. Um, the stories are a bit crazy,
Yeah.
all the different things that she tried to do. But it was 2 years of it. And finally, she had stopped letting me see the kids at all. I would show up to pick up the kids. We had a neutral spot at a restaurant. I would go in and get a drink, so I had a receipt, and I would take a picture. So the receipt timed up with um, the the date on my camera with the picture, just to show that she didn't show up. And this went along for about 3 months, and I only, out of something like 96 hours that I was supposed to get over a 3-month period or something like that, I got maybe 8 hours of seeing my kids.
Hmm.
So that's what kind of, after all the protective orders. I mean, I hired a parental supervisor to be with me. I paid someone to be with me when I saw my kids, so I could have some documentation over how I was with my kids. And a year of that, which was costly. But the judge is looking at her going, everything you're saying, it's
Yeah.
not coming out to be true. And then on top of that, she stopped letting me see the kids. So I I don't truly know the bottom underlying need of hers. I know that she was a blogger, and she put herself out there as a perfect parent as well as a victim, right? So if you look
Hmm.
at the starting of our relationship, she was immediately from our first date a victim, right? She claimed she was raped, right? And she didn't want to, um, uh, you know, I guess she was maybe embarrassed about having gotten pregnant and married so young, so she made up the story of rape, and that just was the theme um, across the relationship. I mean, there were made up car accidents. There
Let
were,
me ask Silas.
yeah. Go ahead.
You had mentioned that like you didn't want to tell your mother and your sister after everything had transpired that night. Did they meet her before when you while you guys were dating?
Yeah, well, my mom met her when we were dating. My sister met her prior to the wedding, shortly prior to the wedding. I'm not, it
Okay.
was it was within a month or so. But
Okay.
yeah,
Do you have a do you have, is there a father in the picture for you, by the way?
my father passed away in '99, so he
Oh,
was long
so
gone by that
he
time.
was passed away by then.
Yeah.
Did your
Yep.
mom had mentioned anything about, hey, this, Silas, I don't think
Not
this
no,
girl's your no.
honestly, not prior to the wedding. I mean, we had fights before the wedding um, that I look back at. But if I put them in the right context, you can't. I mean, you can say, that was okay. It was our wedding day where um, that just was weird to me. I didn't understand it. That it was the wedding day where I was that really opened my eyes, because she was all day threatening to leave me at the altar. She the when the pregnancy that we had, she actually lost the baby prior to the wedding, so she was not
Hmm.
pregnant when we got married. Our
Okay.
first son came about a year later, um, but so she was all day claiming she wasn't going to show up at the altar, and I was this and I was that, and she had all kinds of reasons for why things weren't the way they were. And so I would call around trying to find people that were around her, because she wasn't picking up her phone, and they're like, no, she's fine, she's having a great time. um, and it
Hmm.
um, and it turns out when she got to the altar, she was hammered, she was drunk, and which was which to be drunk is not cool, I guess. But I had been very careful to like not have too much to drink, because she was one of our fights was whether we were going to have alcohol served at the reception at all. I mean, I wanted my family to be able to loosen up and have some drinks. She didn't want anything at all, and she didn't want me drinking at all. And then it claims, all the while she's just saying, I'm not going to show up, and you did this and you did that. She's in the bridal suite drinking champagne all day, and shows up to the altar hammered. So
Hmm.
that was, and I'm trying to quicken up the story here, because it's hard to go through all the stuff that she said, but it was just a chaotic day, and the confusion and the mixed signal of everything, and to have her show up drunk was a real eye opener to me, in terms of what she believed she could the standard she believed she could hold me to,
Yeah.
versus the way she felt she could act. And it was, that was the again, that's another theme. It was just sort of, I can't go out with my friends, but she could go out and do whatever she
Yeah.
wanted whenever she wanted. And
Did your friends have anything to say about her while you guys dated?
I
Were
no,
they?
you know what? Not really. It wasn't. My in fact, my mom and sister, were pretty comfortable with her. They liked her. But as I started telling them stories, and I would tell people enough, because as we got married, there was, she was attempting to isolate me from, especially my sister, who was, as my sister started seeing things, and as she started sharing stuff on her blogs, my sister was getting more and more wary. And so she tried to isolate me from my sister, and then also, all my friends that I had had, for years in town. She was trying to isolate me from them. But I was I was smart enough and confident enough to know that, if this is the situation where it's an abuser, they do try to isolate you. And so I was um, pretty careful. I would go to work and make phone calls from a work phone, versus my cell phone, because she was checking my cell phone. I've never been able to prove it, but I believe she was checking my email left and right. And I don't, as much as I changed my passwords, I wasn't able to keep her out of emails. But she was clearly monitoring things on my side somehow, because she would know things that I just never, um, she could not have known. But anyway, sorry, I go off on like tangents here. But no, it wasn't until well after the wedding, to where me telling people, that it became really kind of clear that this was, I don't know, this wasn't a healthy
It was
situation,
toxic.
I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Um. You have all this stuff now, so now you're working on a book, right? Or you have a book that's
right.
about to
Yep,
come out, and
yep.
it's loosely based on. on these events?
Yeah, so it's inspired by these events, and and I think as I'm talking through this, you can kind of tell there's a lot of stuff that happened prior to the attack, like I said earlier, right? But I actually for years I was trying to write a nonfiction story about this, right? So um, pretty quickly after this happened, I started going out and trying to research and take a look at stories of other men, and it wasn't out there. So my thought was always to tell my story from a nonfiction standpoint, but it was really difficult to create that story because when I'm writing some of these stories, they don't necessarily translate to print very well. So I sat down with Jeff, like you talked about, and we talked about, well, what if I go a fictional route? And that allowed me to take some license and create, a little bit, and add a little bit more to make it more of a story. But the underlying theme that men go through this, but then B, domestic violence looks differently in almost every situation, right? I tell the story now. It's easy to kind of see where those flags were, and it's difficult to not say, you should have known. But when you're in that situation, it's not always so easy,
Hmm.
right? So the as I'm about ready, or as I got ready to push this book out, um, there's a slow crawl towards where things get to be okay. This is a little bit too much, right? So and I think that's a common theme in most abusive situations, to where by the time you recognize the water's boiling, it's difficult, to really jump out, right? You're you
Hmm.
know and you're in an urgent situation more than you're in a safety, in a safe spot to just simply walk away. And part of what I was writing today is there are probably a lot of relationships out there where people walk away unharmed, right? But a lot of this stuff that I went through before the attack, I would venture that a lot of people go through it, right? I know a lot of men go through false accusations in divorce court. Divorce court is a really emotional, difficult situation for a lot of people, and so there's when emotions are high like that, there's a lot of things being lobbed, and then you never know what's happening behind closed doors, and you don't know what is happening where people are just a little bit too shy to talk about or to
Hmm.
admit to, even, right? So
Yeah.
and even some of the things that we talked about today, I mean, those are where it gets harder for me to talk about, is some of these things that led up to it, and and the signs that I missed, and because any way you slice it, when you review it with 2020 hindsight, you feel a little um, you feel a little naive, I guess,
Hmm.
is the best
Yeah.
way to put it, right? So yeah,
No, no, I think that makes sense, right? It's like the oh, the I shoulda, coulda, woulda,
right,
right? Really, that
right,
and that's a thing
right,
with shame, but
yeah,
you know, um, I'm a big proponent in giving yourself grace. I'm a man of faith, and so that's where I come from. A lot of my perspective, it's like when you stay in the shoulda, coulda, woulda, then you're not allowing yourself to process and heal. So hopefully this has helped you in some way, just to be able to
yeah.
talk things out, and it can help
Thank you.
other men who have the shoulda, coulda, woulda, and be like, oh, maybe I can kind of come, because you do work with domestic abuse as well. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I'm trying to build a I'm trying to learn more about it, for starters, right? And so
Hmm.
and I do want to be a voice. I'm just brand new. For the last year, I've just tried to write this book, right?
Hmm.
But ultimately, my goal is to learn more and to give at least more visibility into the male side of domestic violence, and I really do believe it happens a lot more than we know.
Hmm.
I mean, men are clearly reluctant to talk about it,
Right.
but I really do think there's aspects to domestic violence that we don't necessarily see as domestic violence. And I think, again, we focus a lot on the physical violence, and my story, because it has the physical violence, some of these things that happened before, lying about rape, car accidents, being accused of domestic abuse in a court of law under oath kind of thing. I think a lot of these things happen, maybe not in the same way, but maybe in a different vein. They're happening, right? Where I, ultimately a partner is trying to gain control somehow in the relationship, and
Hmm.
they're doing it in unhealthy ways.
Right.
So
Before we kind of wrap up, I did want to ask, how has it been? You're a single father now to your boys. You work a
right.
job and you're writing. How is that going for you? I mean, that's did were you previously a writer? Did you do you write quite a bit in your normal day to day work, or is this something that you kind of wanted to
Yeah,
take
but
on
no,
and start writing?
outside of personal journaling, not I don't do a ton of creative writing. Um, I work in the IT world, so I'll do technical writing and things like that, but not as much. So this was a new venture. I mean, I started from scratch, not knowing how to write a book. And for me, I took on a coach to help me. I mean, that really helped me, and I've clearly learned over the year a lot more about writing. So, but no, I didn't have, it was not something that I did as a side gig or anything like that. It really was just, I had a story that I wanted to get out, and I knew there was some benefit to sharing my story, but there's also a reason it took 10 years to get there. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's, to say to yourself, I have a story that I can write the story that, I mean, I looked for, someone that would help me write it, to actually write it. But I'm actually glad I went this route, because I've learned so much about just putting the book together and everything like that. And I have plans to write two more after this. So, and those are completely fictional, but they follow on this story, and there's a different, slightly different theme, focusing more on coercive control,
Mm-hmm.
that I'd like to explore in those
So
books.
Interrupted Dreams will be the first one of these.
Right. Yeah,
Okay.
Interrupted Dreams is a trilogy, and Interrupted Dreams, the book, is the first in a series of three that are going to eventually come out.
Nice.
Right.
And I think if I'm correct, the book's coming out at the end of this month, so it's October right now. What's
Yeah,
the date
October
release date?
29th is the date of the official release. And yeah, it'll be available on Amazon, in print, as well as Kindle version, at
Yeah,
least
so
for
we're
the for
recording
those.
today. Today's
Yeah,
October 12th. This episode will be coming out at the end of the week. So what day is that? It's like the 15th or
the
16th?
29th is Friday, so it's Halloween weekend.
Okay.
I scheduled it for that weekend, just because. Well, because I could, because
Yeah, it's your book. So
ultimately
you do
it's,
what you want.
yeah, ultimately it's a thriller, and um, I'll tell you, the editing process was probably harder than the writing process. So, I'm glad I gave myself a little extra time. I've actually had the
Mhm.
first draft completed in March, but I'm still spending my nights right now. Once I finish up with work, I dig in, try to get my boys fed, spend a little time with them, and
Mhm.
then I'm cracking on the book, because um, it, what they say, you'll be editing the book even after it's published, and I have
Yeah.
to be honest. I'll there's no greater truth that I learned this year than I did that, because I'll find a passage that's absolutely perfect, and I'll read it a day later, and find 12 different things to change it.
No.
Right? So, but it's been fun. I mean, it's been great. It definitely has been therapeutic.
Mhm.
And I mean, I think people will enjoy reading it, and so yeah, so
I think yeah,
we'll
I
see.
think I mean this the story is fascinating in itself. So I hope that the listeners can go and
Yeah,
check it
thank you.
out. So this is
Yeah,
Silas Cast. You can find him at Bullethead Books on Twitter and also on Instagram. His website, bulletheadbooks.com. The book is Interrupted Dreams. This is Silas Cass. He's a thriller author, domestic abuse survivor, and advocate. This has been the Reach Your Keys podcast. Thanks so much for listening in today, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
thanks so much, Joel.
You're welcome.